Welcome to the channel, viewers. I'm Dr. JWA. You like and subscribe to help me, comment to educate me, and share the video to help somebody else. Before I play this clip, watch how quickly anti-racism language becomes institutional accusation. Senator Mehreen Faruqi is not merely asking whether racism should be opposed. Racism must be opposed. The real issue is whether anti-racism is being used as a disciplined protection against hatred, or as a political instrument to accuse Australia as though the nation itself is morally guilty unless Faruqi's preferred funding position is accepted. Faruqi is addressing the Anti-Discrimination Minister, and the Minister rejects her accusations and assumptions bluntly, and that matters. The Minister does not accept the premise that the government's position equals indifference to racism, nor that disagreement with Faruqi's framing proves moral failure. Yet Faruqi appears to continue as though the answer has not been given, and that's where the exchange exposes Faruqi's weakness. Faruqi presses beyond inquiry into accusation. She demands recognition of a premise, then appears exasperated when the institution refuses to validate it. The concern is not anti-racism itself. The concern is selective anti-racism, ideological instance, and the use of moral accusation as political leverage. And when anti-Semitism funding is treated as though it competes against anti-racism rather than belonging within the fight against hatred, the frame becomes distorted. And Mehreen Faruqi seems to be distorted as well. The Minister's rejection is decisive because it draws the boundary Faruqi appears unwilling to accept. And I ask you to listen to my final statement clearly, final opening statement. Anti-racism must protect Australians from hatred. It must not become a political weapon for branding Australia hateful whenever the institution refuses to fund, repeat, or endorse one ideological narrative.
I have some questions for the Minister representing the Attorney General and then for the Race Discrimination Commissioner. So Australia, as you know, is seeing an alarming rise in racism. I mean, just recently, a man was charged for threatening to have an AK-47 firearm after entering a Brisbane mosque. And people of colour across the country are living in fear and exhaustion while racism becomes increasingly normalised as the far right, One Nation, and the Liberals escalate their hate-filled anti-migrant, anti-Muslim rhetoric. And I'm afraid to say, Minister, that your government is sitting on its hands as the National Anti-Racism Framework gathers dust. Why is the government refusing to fund the National Anti-Racism Framework? There was no funding in this budget to start implementing the Anti-Racism Framework. Why aren't you funding it?
Thanks for the question, Senator. Obviously, the framework was published by the Commission in November 2024. The government has provided funding to the Commission to develop the National Anti-Racism Strategy, of which the framework was a part of that. Further to that, we're carefully considering the recommendations of the framework. It's not a requirement that the government would respond in the way that other reports require a response, but we're considering those recommendations. And, further to that, we're certainly committed to a holistic response to address racism. There's quite a number of projects that are underway that you would be aware of. We're funding the Commission, $2.5 million for the Racism at Uni project, $2 million for the Commission for the Seen and Heard project. And we're looking at, we're funding the Commission to deliver a new anti-racism campaign, which I'm sure that they can speak to in full detail. There's obviously a range of other things that we're considering or addressing, including comprehensive hate speech reforms, which we brought to Parliament.
Yeah, Minister, I'm asking specifically about the National Anti-Racism Framework. It took years and years of work and many millions of dollars for the AHRC and the Race Discrimination Commissioner and the department to complete that. It has been 19 months since that framework was launched. I mean, how much more consideration do you have to give to 63 recommendations that will start, actually you said you want to look at it holistically, start addressing racism in a systematic way in this country. Like, you can do report after report, and I've seen all those reports as well, but even the Racism at Universities report has been out there now for some time with no response from the government. So I want to ask you, has the government, do you think have you identified a flaw or an issue with the framework that justifies you shelving it for 19 months and not even responding to it? You said you don't have to respond to it in the usual way. I don't know what that means. A response should be fund the budget, put some money in the budget to start implementing some of the recommendations. So have you found a flaw in that National Anti-Racism Framework that you are still considering it after 19 months?
No, Senator, that wasn't my evidence. My evidence was that we welcomed the framework and we're providing a holistic approach to making sure that we are addressing racism in our society. We certainly have taken you through a number of the ways that we are doing that. If there's broader policy questions, of course, there was an opportunity to ask those yesterday, but if there's questions about the work that the Commission's doing, they're here to answer those.
Well, the Commission did produce the framework, so I'm asking you, this is the right place to ask the question. The framework, just in September last year, the Race Discrimination Commissioner warned the Attorney General that unless Australia addressed the structural roots of racism, racist hatred would continue to spill onto our streets. And the framework is the holistic way, as you keep saying, and the structural way of addressing racism. I guess my question is, do you think that racism is an issue in this country?
Senator, there's no place for racism in this country, for hate, discrimination of any kind. We've been very clear about that, and we certainly believe that every Australian, no matter of their race, is entitled to live their life freely, without prejudice, without discrimination, and that's how we're approaching this issue.
Do you think racism is an issue in this country?
Oh, Senator, I've answered your question.
No, you have not. Of course, racism is unacceptable, but do you think it's an issue in this country? Do people face racism in this country?
Senator, I've answered your question about what the government is doing about this issue and the way that we are approaching it.
When will you provide a response to the National Anti-Racism Framework?
I'll let the department answer that. If there's any work underway, they can let you know.
Thanks, Minister. Consideration of the framework is being conducted across a number of departments. I note that many of the recommendations are directed at the Commonwealth Government, some are at state governments, some are at the private sector, so it's not for the Commonwealth to solely implement the recommendations or consider the recommendations, and there is ongoing work alongside considering the reports of the special envoys for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So there's a broad range of connecting issues that are being considered across government.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. You said there are recommendations to the Commonwealth. When will the Commonwealth respond to those recommendations?
Well, I think, as the Minister has already said, there is no requirement to respond to Commission reports. Obviously, there's a process of looking at the report and using those recommendations to inform further work, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Well, it's been 19 months Like, it just seems to me, Minister, that the government really does not give a damn about what people of color are facing in the community every single day. Like, the documents that we forced out of the government recently show that the Race Discrimination Commissioner has written to the Attorney General on multiple occasions, literally pleading for action on the National Anti-Racism Framework, and yet the only response that even the Race Discrimination Commissioner gets is it is being carefully considered. So, who am I to seek a response from you? But while you are carefully considering, people are being harmed every single day in this country. So I would really want you to do something about it. I mean, it's exasperating coming here, every estimate, asking the same questions over and over, getting the same non-responses over and over, while people in the community just keep kind of suffering. You said that you were, you are considering the other reports that are being done. And I do know that obviously there is a lot of focus on anti-Semitism at the moment. There's a Royal Commission going on. We should address obviously all types of racism. But is there, when you really want to tackle social cohesion, you have to tackle racism in all its ways, shapes, or forms. Do you think there is an issue in giving higher priority to some sorts of racism and not others? Don't you think that further exacerbates and divides communities when you don't fund one sort of racism but try and fund some other sorts of racism? Do you think that's an issue, and is that a double standard?
Senator, I think first of all, a couple of things. First of all, that's not what the government's doing. I reject that assertion. I think if we are still here giving evidence in the section of the Australian Human Rights Commission, which the committee agreed to, I'll speak to what the Human Rights Framework does. It doesn't distinguish between different types of people who are entitled to protection under the law. And the government from time to time will fund different programs for different reasons. But we have spoken to you about some of the things that we are doing as a government holistically. Of course, there is work across the entire Attorney General's Department, which our officials were here yesterday to give evidence about that, and across government on a range of matters. I think, in the way that you're entitled to give long preambles to your questions, but I reject the assertion that you've made. Okay. Well, how much funding have you provided to the anti-racism framework in this budget? How much funding have you provided, for dealing with anti-Muslim hate in this budget? Senator, I've taken you through the different pieces of work that we are funding. I can take on notice your question.
But I can tell you zero funding for the anti-racism framework, zero funding for addressing Islamophobia.
I can take your question on notice.
Viewers, that exchange should leave Australians questioning Faruqi's framing. She claims to be defending anti-racism, but the structure of the exchange appears to move beyond accountability and accusation. She addresses the Anti-Discrimination Commission, receives a blunt rejection of her assumptions, and yet continues as though the only acceptable answer is confirmation that Australia is failing and more funding is required. That's not scrutiny at its strongest. The ideological instance under the language of justice. The Anti-Discrimination Commission's rejection matters because it exposes a central problem. Faruqi appears unable or unwilling to accept an answer that does not validate her premise. The Commission and the Minister do not accept the accusation as framed. They reject the suggestion that anti-racism has been abandoned simply because Faruqi's preferred demand has not been satisfied. Australia has a real racism problem. Anti-Semitism is real. And migrant hostility is real. But anti-racism loses moral authority when it becomes selective, accusatory, and politically weaponised. The severe point is this. Faruqi does not appear in that exchange to be representing Australia as a whole. She appears to be prosecuting Australia through a fixed ideology grievance, demanding that the institution fund and validate the accusation. And when the Anti-Discrimination Minister bluntly rejects her assumptions, the weakness is exposed. Or should I say, just to clarify in case that wasn't the Minister, the Anti-Discrimination Commission bluntly rejects her assumptions and the weaknesses is exposed. In my closing statement, anti-racism must defend people from hatred. It must not become a political framework that condemns the nation first, ignores the answer second, and calls disagreement proof of guilt.